You say we should have no world policeman. The world doesn't need a policeman. We're wise and powerful. Isn't it our responsibility to help others that way?
It's okay for us to have a responsibility personally to help other people. If we didn't have an income tax, you would have more money and you could help as many people as you wanted. But to go around the world and spread democracy and spread our goodness, no. I think it doesn't work. There's too many unintended consequences. And to spread our goodness overseas, it usually requires force. We're spreading our goodness in Iraq. We can't do that without dropping bombs on there and killing a lot of people. I think we should only do those things under the prescribed conditions of the Constitution.
Is war ever justifiable?
Sure. If you're attacked, you have a right and an obligation to defend our country. And the Constitution is very clear on that. So yes, in defense, I do not believe there's ever a moral justification to start the war.
So World War II, we were justified.
Sure.
Because of Pearl Harbor.
Right.
How about going into Afghanistan after September 11th?
I voted for that authority to go after those responsible for 9/11. I was very unhappy with what happened because we neglected to pursue Osama bin Laden. We didn't
but
pursue.
We were justified because he was there. He was supported
he was there,
by that country.
And they committed a violent act. But that did not mean that they had the authority to occupy and try to transform Afghanistan, which is a problem that has not gone away yet. It's going to be growing. That is a perpetual problem for us because we did not do what we were supposed to do.
The Korean War?
Totally unjustified. It's,
Kosovo?
Absolutely unjustified.
Vietnam?
A horror.
We should just not have gotten involved.
Right.
How about the first Iraq War? They invade Kuwait. We should just say, not our business?
That was a border dispute. Matter of fact, we told Saddam Hussein, who was our ally when we went into Iran, he was encouraged by us. So he told us, he let us know, that he might do it.
Then he might have invaded the next country and the next country.
Well, maybe they should do something about it. I bet Israel would have done something about it, and I bet Saudi Arabia maybe would have talked to Israel. I think if it would have been left to the region, they might have taken care of Saddam Hussein in 1990, and we wouldn't have the problems we had today.
But it's not our business.
It's not our business.
Even if there's genocide, terrible suffering places?
No, because genocides, the Soviets did it, the Chinese did it, Pol Pot did it. I think it's a tragedy, and we can have a moral statement, but you can't use force of arms to invade other countries to make them better people. Our job is to make us a better people.
If we don't attack them there, they'll attack us here.
And I think the opposite is true. I think the fact that we occupy their territories, and we have angered even more people now. Our occupation has expanded tremendously from what it was like before 9/11. And yet the radicals were able to use our bases in Saudi Arabia and the bombing of Iraq as a reason, to come over here. They were motivated, 19 individuals ready to sacrifice their lives and come over here. And
because we had bases in their land.
If you believe what Osama bin Laden says, and I don't think he would lie.
Rudy Giuliani says that's an absurd explanation on the debate.
He did say that, and maybe he has changed his mind because I gave him quite a few books to read that have studied this rather well by CIA agents and other experts, and they come up with a different conclusion. I think logic tells us that I'm right on this side of the issue, especially if China were to do the same thing to us, and they were here, and they had troops in our land, and they said they were going to protect their oil. I don't think we would like it. We would resent it. We'd probably do some shooting.
We'd be ticked off.
Yeah.
But is this case not different? There are religious fanatics who hate us and want to kill us simply because of our culture.
I don't think that's true. It is not Muslim fanaticism that is the culprit. The country that has the most suicide terrorism is in Sri Lanka, and it's not a Muslim issue. The two most radical Islamic countries in the world, Iran and Sudan, do not commit suicide terrorism. So that is not the litmus test. The litmus test is whether they interpret or we are actually occupying a territory that they resent. In the case of Saudi Arabia, that was holy land for them.
You would pull our troops out of most everywhere. You'd pull American troops out of Korea, Germany, Middle East, everywhere.
I would. There'd be several reasons. One, under the Constitution, we don't have the authority to just put troops in foreign countries willy-nilly, and we're not at war. I mean, where does this authority come from? The other major reason is we can't afford it anymore. We're going broke. We're on the verge of doing what all great empires have done in the past: spread themselves too far wide around the world, and then they have to come home because the currency is finally devalued and depreciated to the point where you can't afford it anymore, and that's what the markets are telling us right now today.
Many say the surge is succeeding. We're at a turning point now, and we are creating a model of democracy in a part of the world that hasn't seen that, and that will change everything.
Well, that's the propaganda. I don't happen to believe that, and if you talk to the military people, a lot of them won't agree with it. I happen to get more money from the military, active military people, than any other candidate because they see it more from my viewpoint.
And if in most of Iraq some religious fanatic comes to power and has money to buy nuclear weapons, just leave them alone?
Well, it's not likely to happen, but the threat was that they had them and they didn't. The Soviets had the technology. I was called to service in the 60s. I served 5 years in the Air Force. They were 90 miles off our shore, and they had nuclear weapons there. But we were able to talk to them. We took our missiles out of Turkey. They took the missiles out of Cuba. We should be talking to people like this. I think it's miraculous that we didn't have to go to a nuclear war with China or the Soviets, and they had a lot of them. But we didn't invade them in order to get rid of those weapons. It's the lack of diplomacy that is the greatest threat, not the weapons themselves.
If North Korea invades South Korea, we should just leave it alone?
Sure, but it's not going to happen. I mean, South Korea is about 10 times more powerful than North Korea.
If China invaded Taiwan?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a border war, and they should deal with it.
We should stay out of it.
Yeah.
If Canada invades Montana?
I think that might be a little bit different. Because Montana probably could take care of it, but we'd probably help them out from Washington if that happened.
That's a role for the federal government.
Oh, sure.
Congressman Paul, let me ask you, do you agree with the Bush doctrine, or would you change it?
Well, I certainly agreed with his foreign policy that he ran on and that we as Republicans won in the year 2000. You know, the humble foreign policy, no nation building, don't be the policeman of the world. And we were strongly critical of the policy of the Clinton administration that did the opposite. And we fell short. Of course, the excuse is that 9/11 changed everything. But the Bush doctrine of preemptive war is not a minor change. This is huge. This is the first time we as a nation accept as our policy that we start the wars. I don't understand this, and that all options are on the table to go after Iran. This is not necessary. These are third world nations. They're not capable. But I think it's the misunderstanding or the disagreements that we've had in this debate along the campaign trail is the nature of the threat. I'm as concerned about the nature of the threat of terrorism as anybody, if not more so. But they don't attack us because we're free and prosperous. And there are radicals in all elements, in all religions, that will resort to violence. But if we don't understand that the reaction is because we invade their countries, and occupy their countries, we have bases in their country, and we haven't done it just since 9/11, but we have done that a long time. I mean, it was the Air Force base in Saudi Arabia before 9/11 that was given as the excuse. If we don't understand that, we can't win this war against terrorism.
If you don't face this squarely, there's an Islamic terrorist threat against us. It's an existential threat. It has nothing to do with our foreign policy. It has to do with their ideas, their theories, the things that they have done in the way they've perverted their religion into a hatred of us. And what's at stake are the things that are best about us: our freedom of religion, our freedom for women, our right to vote, our free economic system. Our foreign policy is irrelevant, totally irrelevant. If you read what they write, if you bother to listen to what they say, this comes out of their own perverted thinking.
Charlie,
go ahead.
Yeah. Let me try to explain so you can understand this better. Try to visualize how we would react if they did that to us. If a country, say China, came that great distance across the ocean, and they say, we want you to live like us. We want you to have our economic system. We want bases on your land. We want to protect our oil. Even if we do that with good intentions, even if the Chinese did that with good intentions, we would all be together and we'd be furious.
Ron, you're reading their propaganda. You're reading their propaganda.
What would you do?
I'd read their writings. I'd read what they write to one another, and that's why when someone like Syed Qutb lays out the philosophy of radical jihadism and says we want to kill.
And what you're saying.
Let me complete. Wants to kill Anwar Sadat when there's the assassination of Anwar Sadat. It has nothing to do with us. Why do they kill Madame Bhutto? It has nothing to do with us. This has to do with a battle that is going on within the world of Islam of radical, violent jihadists trying to bring down all moderate Islamic people and nations and replace them with a religious caliphate. And we are doing our very best to help support the voices of moderation.
Who had we invaded before 9/11?
They treaded in the Philippines.
We were occupying. We had an air base in Saudi Arabia.
Ron,
we have propped up. How many governments have we propped up?
So back to foreign policy now. The major difference between your foreign policy agenda and his is?
Probably the same as my disagreement with the Democratic Party, too, and that is they basically endorse the idea that we have a moral and constitutional responsibility to be everywhere, to police the world, go into nation building. Although George Bush won in the year 2000, taking the position similar to mine, we do too much nation building and too much interference around the world. And mine is very precise, and I just don't think we should do it. I don't think our interests are best served by having troops everywhere. For one reason, I don't think we can afford it, and I just don't like the idea that we've invaded countries that have not attacked us, that we're in Iraq, we're in Afghanistan, we threaten the Iranians, and everybody hardly even questions, Republicans or Democrats, oh yeah, we should be in Georgia. I mean, why? They're fighting over there. We're going to rebuild the army that we had already built. The main reason is there's an oil line going through Georgia. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I differ with John McCain on, but I differ with Obama as well.
Take the last minute and just give us your perspective of foreign policy, what needs to be changed.
Well, I would take the advice of the founders, and I would take the advice of George Bush when he ran in the year 2000. No nation building. You know, don't be the policeman of the world. He was highly critical of Clinton. So I would say that we should have a foreign policy of staying out of entangling alliances. I mean, why should we cheer on the entangling alliance of NATO and the United Nations? Here look at the mess we're in Libya today. So I would say we should be out of all those international organizations. We should defend this country, but it would mean bringing our troops home. Yeah! Let the troops come home and spend their money here. Now, that would be a monetary injection I could support. But no, we're subsidizing the welfare state of Germany by paying for their defense and Japan as well as South Korea.
What's the globe look like if you start bringing back American troops? You pull them out of Germany, out of Japan, out of Korea. Is there any place out there that you would have forces outside the territory of the United States?
No, I'd bring them all home. I'd bring them home.
Would you then project power into any part of the world with the Navy?
No, power. You want to have the facility to defend our country, but we're less able to defend ourselves right now because the number one threat to us now is terrorist attacks. And you know, before 2003, when we went into Iraq, on the average there were 3 suicide attacks per year. By 2007, there were 700 per year. So the attacks have grown by leaps and bounds because of the very presence that we have overseas. The troops are over there because of miscalculation, and the miscalculation is the fact that we've never asked, as a country, what was the motivation of 9/11. If you don't ask the motivation and you continue to do the same thing, those numbers of attacks are going to grow and grow, and the more troops you put around the world and looking at the sanctuary rather than at the problem, the greater danger we're going to be in and the more vulnerable we'll be in. And besides, we're bankrupt. We can't afford it anymore. So I would bring the troops home. It would be a big boom to the economy. I believe we would have a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense.
I just want to also say that Congressman Paul, I've heard him now in many debates talking about bringing our troops home and about the war in Iraq and how it's failed. And I want to tell you that that kind of isolationism, sir, is what caused World War II. Allow him his answer, please. We allowed Hitler to come to power with that kind of attitude of isolationism and appeasement. Okay. And I want to tell you something, sir. I just finished having Thanksgiving with the troops, and their message to you is, the message of these brave men and women who are serving over there is, let us win. Let us win. That's what they want.
We will, please. We will get to Iraq. All right. Let me just remind everyone that these people did take a lot of time to ask these questions, and so we do want direct questions to the answers. We will get to Iraq later, but I do have to allow Congressman Paul 30 seconds to respond.
Absolutely. The real question you have to ask is, why do I get the most money from active duty officers, military personnel? So what John is saying is just totally distorted. He doesn't even understand the difference between non-intervention and isolationism. I'm not an isolationist. I want to trade with people, talk with people, travel, but I don't want to send our troops overseas using force to tell them how to live. We would object to it here, and they're going to object to us over there.
Question from Twitter. Do you plan to decrease defense spending to balance spending, or do you believe high spending is essential to security? Congressman Paul.
First thing I would like to do is make sure that you understand there's a difference between military spending and defense spending. I'm tired of all the militarism that we're involved in, and we're wasting this money and getting us involved. And I agree, we are still in danger, but most of the danger comes by our lack of wisdom on how we run our foreign policy. So I would say there's a lot of room to cut on the military, but not on the defense. You can slash the military spending. We don't need to be building airplanes that were used in World War II. We're always fighting the last war. But we're under great threat because we occupy so many countries. We're in 130 countries. We have 900 bases around the world. We're going broke. The purpose of al-Qaeda was to attack us, invite us over there where they can target us, and they have been doing it. They have more attacks against us and the American interest per month than occurred in all the years before 9/11. But we're there, occupying their land, and if we think that we can do that and not have retaliation, we're kidding ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves. What would we do if another country, say China, did to us what we do to all those countries over there? So I would say a policy, a foreign policy that takes care of our national defense, that we're willing to get along with people and trade with people as the founders advised. There's no authority in the Constitution to be the policeman of the world, and no nation building. Just remember, George Bush won the presidency on that platform in the year 2000, and I still think it's a good platform.
Here was one of them.
Hi, I'm Jill Hepker from Grinnell, Iowa. My question is, if you were president, what would be your strategy for ending the war in Iraq?
Congressman Paul, what would it be?
Just come home. We just marched in. We can just come home. We went in there illegally. We did not declare war. It's lasting way too long. We didn't declare war in Korea or Vietnam. The wars were never really ended. We lose those wars. We're losing this one. We shouldn't be there. We ought to just come home because it is the number one reason. It's in our national self-interest and for our national security. Think of our defenses now, how run down they are. What is the morale of our military today when they're sent over there for 12 months and then they're kept for another 3 months? They come home and less than a year's rest, they're sent back again. Congress is currently trying to change the rules so we give these men an adequate rest. This war is not going well because the foreign policy is defective.
Congressman Hunter, Congressman Paul, you get the last word on this round.
I, of course, opposed the war a long time before it started. The neoconservatives promoted this war many, many years before it was started. Had nothing to do with al-Qaeda. There was no al-Qaeda in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Just think of the weapons the Soviets had in the 60s and the 70s, and we did not have to go to nuclear war with them. There's no reason to go to war against these third world nations. At the same time, those individuals who have predicted these disastrous things to happen if we leave Iraq are the same ones who said as soon as we go in, it will just be duck soup. It'll be over in 3 months. It won't cost us anything because the oil will pay for it.
Has he forgotten about 9/11?
At the same time,
have you forgotten about 9/11?
Just a moment. At the same time, the individuals who predicted the disaster, of course, the domino theory in Vietnam, I was called to duty. I accepted that duty in the 60s. I served 5 years in the military. When we left there, it was tough. Yes, but now we trade with Vietnam. We talk to them. The presidents come to this country. We go back and forth. We invest in that country. We can achieve much more in peace than we can ever achieve in these needless, unconstitutional, undeclared wars.
Senator McCain in school. Congressman Paul.
Our responsibility is to spread democracy here, make sure that we have it. This is a philosophic and foreign policy problem because what the president was saying was just a continuation of Woodrow Wilson's making the world safe for democracy. There's nothing wrong with spreading our values around the world, but it is wrong to spread it by force. We should spread it by setting an example and doing a good job here. Threatening Pakistan and threatening Iran makes no sense whatsoever. We went in, and I supported going after the al-Qaeda into Afghanistan, but lo and behold, the neocons took over. They forgot about Osama bin Laden, and what they did, they went into nation building not only in Afghanistan, they went unjustifiably over into Iraq, and that's why we're in this mess.
Mayor Giuliani, both Governor Huckabee.
And why should we not be talking about foreign policy that used to be the part of the Republican Party? Mr. Republican Robert Taft didn't even want us to be in NATO. And you're saying now that we have to continue to borrow money from China to finance this empire that we can't afford? Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government, and then we go to war. We lose all these lives promoting democracy in Iraq. I mean, what's going on here?
Congressman Paul, would we have gone to war in Iraq if we weren't so dependent on Middle East oil?
Probably not, but that should not be a reason. That's an old theory. It's mercantilistic. It's neo-colonialism that you have to maintain your supply routes and your natural resources. But I think there's still a lot of those kind of people around, and they believe, we were told it was about oil and jobs when it first started in 1990, and this is just a continuation of that war. Indeed, this war is a mistake. It was a mistake to go in. It's very costly, and it has a lot of economic ramifications. We're going broke. We have this huge deficit. We're spending nearly $1 trillion with maintaining our empire overseas, and that's a cost. Right now, we own foreigners $2.7 trillion. No wonder they have money to come back in here and buy stuff up, and then we object. But that has to do with our monetary system as well as our foreign policy. So if we want prosperity, we have to change our foreign policy. We have to live within our means, but we can't maintain a reserve currency where all our greatest export today are paper dollars. We create money out of thin air, and they still accept it as if it was backed by gold. And that is the reason all this money goes overseas, and at the same time we finance all this military activity overseas. It's bankrupting this country. And not only that, it's a threat to our personal liberties here, and it's going to be a threat to our economy because we are beginning to live beneath our means. And that is a natural consequence of what happens when you live beyond your means. So we must change our policy both overseas and domestically.
Congressman Paul, your position on the war is pretty simple. Get out. What about, though, trying to minimize the bloodbath that would certainly occur if we pull out in a hurry? What about protecting the thousands of Iraqis who have staked their lives in backing the U.S. And would you leave troops in the region to take out any al-Qaeda camps that are developed after we leave?
The people who say there will be a bloodbath are the ones who said it would be a cakewalk, it would be a slam dunk, and that it would be paid for by oil. Why believe them? They've been wrong on everything they've said. So why not ask the people who advise not to go into the region and into the war? The war has not gone well one bit. Yes, I would leave completely. Why leave the troops in the region? It was the fact that we had troops in Saudi Arabia was one of the three reasons given for the attack on 9/11. So why leave them in the region? They don't want our troops on the Arabian Peninsula. We have no need for our national security to have troops on the Arabian Peninsula. And going into Iraq and Afghanistan and threatening Iran is the worst thing we can do for our national security. I am less safe. The American people are less safe for this. It's the policy that is wrong. Tactical movements and shifting troops around and taking in 30 more and reducing by 5, totally irrelevant. We need a new foreign policy that said we ought to mind our own business, bring our troops home, defend this country, defend our borders.
So if... So, Congressman Paul, and I'd like you to take 30 seconds to answer this. You're basically saying that we should take our marching orders from al-Qaeda. If they want us off the Arabian Peninsula, we should leave?
No. I'm saying we should take our marching orders from our Constitution. We should not go to war. We should not go to war without a declaration. We should not go to war when it's an aggressive war. This is an aggressive invasion. We've committed the invasion of this war, and it's illegal under international law. That's where I take my marching orders, not from any...
Governor Huckabee, the latest national intelligence estimate, which is out recently, says that even if we continue the troop surge, and we're going to put it up on the screen, Iraq's security will continue to improve modestly during the next 6 to 12 months, but levels of insurgent and sectarian violence will remain high, and the Iraqi government will continue to struggle to achieve national-level political reconciliation and improve governance. Governor, if that's the best we can hope for, should we continue the surge?
We have to continue the surge. And let me explain why, Chris. When I was a little kid, if I went into a store with my mother, she had a simple rule for me. If I picked something off the shelf at the store and I broke it, I bought it. I learned, don't pick something off the shelf I can't afford to buy. Well, what we did in Iraq, we essentially broke it. It's our responsibility to do the best we can to try to fix it before we just turn away, because something is at stake. Senator McCain made a great point. And let me make this clear. If there's anybody on this stage that understands the word honor, I've got to say Senator McCain understands that word, because he has given his country a sacrifice the rest of us don't even comprehend. And on this issue, when he says we can't leave until we've left with honor, I 100% agree with him, because, Congressman, whether or not we should have gone to Iraq is a discussion that historians can have, but we're there. We bought it because we broke it. We've got a responsibility to the honor of this country and to the honor of every man and woman who has served in Iraq and ever served in our military, to not leave them with anything less than the honor that they deserve.
Go ahead. You wanted to respond? He just addressed you. You go ahead and respond.
The American people didn't go in. A few people advising this administration, a small number of people called the neoconservatives, hijacked our foreign policy. They're responsible, not the American people. They're not responsible. We shouldn't punish them.
Congressman, we are one nation. We can't be divided. We have to be one nation under God. That means if we make a mistake, we make it as a single country, the United States of America, not the divided States of America.
When we make a mistake, it is the obligation of the people through their representatives to correct the mistake, not to continue the mistake.
And that's what we do on the floor of the Senate?
No, we've dug a hole for ourselves, and we've dug a hole for our party.
We're losing elections, and we're going down next year if we don't change it, and it has all to do with foreign policy, and we have to wake up to this fact.
Even if we lose elections, we should not lose our honor, and that is more important than the Republican Party.
We have lost over 5,000 Americans killed in Afghanistan. We've lost over 5,000 Americans over there in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and plus the civilians killed. How many more do you want to lose? How long are you going to be there? How long? What do we have to pay to save face? That's all we're doing is saving face. It's time we came home.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Congressman Paul, do you promise to support the nominee of the Republican Party next year?
Not right now, I don't. Not unless they're willing to end the war and bring our troops home, and not unless they're willing to look at the excessive spending. No, I'm not going to support them if they continue down the path which has taken our party down the tubes. I mean, we've lost credibility because of all our spending, because we have violated the civil liberties of all the American people, and we have adopted the Democrats' foreign policy. Why don't we run on George Bush's foreign policy of a humble foreign policy and no nation building, and don't police the world? Then I'll support you.
Before I jump into the text, let me ask you, if I can, a couple of quick questions about Afghanistan, since it's all over the news. The White House has basically said that we don't need to send more troops. Rahm Emanuel, I'm quoting here now, the chief of staff, saying that we don't need to send more troops to Afghanistan until they have a legitimate and credible government. Two questions: legitimate and credible government. One, what does that mean to you when you hear that, number one? And number two, even if that were the case, do we need to be sending more troops to Afghanistan?
No, we don't need to be sending any more troops over there. We need to be bringing our troops home. And this whole idea of a legitimate government, there's no answer to that. That was virtually impossible to arrange that, and who's going to make the decision? And one thing for sure is Karzai can't be legitimate because he is seen as a puppet of ours, and I think this election is basically a fraud. A third of the votes that Karzai was supposed to have gotten were ruled, illegal. So the whole thing is preposterous. I mean, the whole notion of us being there is ridiculous. And the sooner we face up to this, the better off we're going to be. We don't have really the troops to send. We don't have the money to spend. And it's just a part of a foreign policy that I've been talking about for many, many years, deeply flawed. And this is an example of what happens to it. You're in a place for 8 years, and then you're starting to decide, what are we here for? What's the purpose? And what's the end point? Who's the government? I mean, it is so foolish. I can't imagine why the people put up with this. And I just wish more people would send a message to their congressman and said, we ought to deal with our problems here at home. Maybe we ought to be concentrating on getting better medical care than just finding another war to fight or continue or expand. So I think the whole thing is foolish.
Much is being said, as you well know today, about the fact that President Karzai has agreed to a runoff election. You're not buying the spin on that?
Oh, yeah, he probably will, but that means there's a lot of pressure put on, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's going to be eased out. You know, sometimes we turn on our puppets. Remember back in Vietnam days when Diem was our puppet, and then we had our CIA overthrow him and actually kill him. So who knows what's exactly going on, but Karzai seems to be hard to defend. And now that there's, I'm sure we were rooting for him in the election, which means that we were involved in it. And there was so much fraud, they got caught at it, so it's getting pretty hard to defend him. Yes, there has to be an election, but I won't be surprised if our government, quits supporting him. He can't exist without our support, so if we withdraw support. But the big problem is they don't have anybody to replace him.
I'm about to ask you, I mean, some people believe that he's not perfect. I mean, I don't think the White House would tell you he's perfect, but the argument might be that he's the best of the rest.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be hard to find anybody that will suit the situation. And whether you put in 20,000, 40,000, or 80,000, I think it's not worth the investment. Go ahead.
So what should the president do then with this tough decision on Afghanistan? What should he do?
I think he should come home and say that we did our best. We took care of the Al-Qaeda. They don't exist there. And the 300 that did exist there, they're all dead or gone. And that we ought to allow the Afghans to decide what kind of government they want. And they don't want a centralized government. They want tribalism, and we just can't change them. People have been trying to do that for centuries, and it's just not going to happen.
One last question.
I would say,
No, I'm sorry. One last question before I go to your book. The argument, though, as you well know, is that if the U.S. were to pull out of Afghanistan or pull out of Iraq, you pull out of that region, the argument is that the whole region collapses and the apocalypse happens if you take Ron Paul's advice and just pull out.
Well, I think staying there is going to cause more trouble. I think the fact that we've been there for 8 years and destabilized the area, Afghanistan isn't stable, but now Pakistan's not stable. Now we're, sending our drones over there and innocent people are getting killed, and we're pretty soon going to think about what we have to do to stabilize and get control of the weapons of Pakistan. At the same time, they're planning on expanding, the efforts to overthrow the government in Iran. They're coming up with real strong sanctions against the Iranians, and that's not going to help us. It's just an endless task to continue to try to nation build and police the world. We weren't meant to do that, and we can't afford it any longer. And it all has, ramifications and blowback phenomenons that will be hurtful to us. I think it's a real threat to our national security to be overly involved in that area.
In the Navy, so you can imagine he has a very important question. What would you like to ask tonight, John?
Osama bin Laden is dead. We've been in Afghanistan for 10 years. Isn't it time to bring our combat troops home from Afghanistan?
Governor Romney, take the lead on that one.
It's time for us to bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can, consistent with the word that comes from our generals that we can hand the country over to the Taliban military in a way that they're able to defend themselves, the Afghan military, to defend themselves from the Taliban. That's an important distinction. But I want to say, first of all, thank you to you for the sacrifice of your family and your sons in defending the liberty that we have and our friends around the world. Thank you for what you've done.
Congressman Paul?
Let me continue, and that is, I think we've learned some important lessons in our experience in Afghanistan. I want those troops to come home based upon not politics, not based upon economics, but instead based upon the conditions on the ground determined by the generals. But I also think we've learned that our troops shouldn't go off and try and fight a war of independence for another nation. Only the Afghanis can win Afghanistan's independence from the Taliban. Thank you.
Congressman Paul, do you agree with that position?
Not quite. I served 5 years in the military. I've had a little experience. I've spent a little bit of time over in the Pakistan, Afghanistan area, as well as in Iran. But I wouldn't wait for my generals. I'm the commander-in-chief. I make the decisions. I tell the generals what to do, and I'd bring them home as quickly as possible, and I'd get them out of Iraq as well, and I wouldn't start a war in Libya. I'd quit bombing Yemen, and I'd quit bombing Pakistan. I'd start taking care of people here at home because we could save hundreds of billions of dollars. Our national security is not enhanced by our presence over there. We have no purpose there. We should learn the lessons of history, and the longer we're there, the worse things are, and the more danger we're in as well, because our presence there is not making friends, let me tell you.
Congressman Paul, you have wanted to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan for years. In fact, you said on the House floor about the U.S. military's efforts in Afghanistan, quote, "Whose interests do we serve by continuing this exercise in futility?" So if President Paul had been running things and troops were already out of Afghanistan, wouldn't that mean that Osama bin Laden would be alive today?
Absolutely not. I mean, he wasn't caught in Afghanistan. Nation building in Afghanistan and telling those people how to live and getting involved in running their country hardly had anything to do with finding the information where he was being held in a country that we give billions of dollars of foreign aid to. At the same time, we're bombing that country. So it's the policy that's at fault. No, not having the troops in Afghanistan wouldn't have hurt. But we went to Afghanistan to get him, and he hasn't been there. Now that he's killed, boy, it is a wonderful time for this country now to reassess it and get the troops out of Afghanistan and end that war that hasn't helped us and hasn't helped anybody in the Middle East.
Thank you. Congressman Paul, you say that we should cut off all foreign aid to the Middle East and, quote, let them take care of themselves. You say the prison at Guantanamo should be closed, that the detainees there have not been given due process. Governor Paletti said a couple of months ago that bullies respect strength, not weakness. Is Governor Pawlenty wrong?
Well, I think strength is good, but you have to have strength in doing the right things. I think secret military prisons, keeping people there for years and years without due process, is not a characteristic of a republic that believes in freedom. It is just not the process. It's more typical of an authoritarian government to have secret prisons. So therefore, I don't think it serves our purpose. We have tried nearly 300 suspects in civilian courts, and hundreds of them have been convicted and put away. So why are we afraid of openness? Why do we have to move in the direction of giving up the right of habeas corpus, which someday, if we're not careful, will affect American citizens? We should treat people the way we think we might be treated under dire circumstances. And our dire circumstances are moving right along because we may have real trouble in this country and we may be subject to the same type of treatment. So we do not need secret prisons, nor do we need the torture that goes on in these secret military prisons.
To this specifically, Congressman Paul, raise your hand if you would support a resumption of waterboarding under any circumstances.
Under certain circumstances or any
yes,
circumstances?
Under certain circumstances.
Certain or any?
Under any circumstances that you could imagine, not all.
Sure, under...
So just to be clear, the three of you under individual case-by-case basis would support waterboarding. Congressman Paul, you would not.
No, I would not.
And Governor Johnson, you would not.
Anything.
I would not.
Okay.
Well, that's just simply not true, Ron. I mean, the fact is that what we found is that some of this information that we found out that led to Osama bin Laden actually came from these enhanced interrogation techniques.
Issues-based coalitions on the military that could actually affect some change while you have the power that you do have.
Well, we've worked pretty hard, a couple of the Republicans and several of the Democrats, especially on the overseas spending. Barney Frank and Kucinich and I, we've worked together in trying to say, you know, it's time to spend less at overseas. It's time to let Germany and Japan pay for their defenses. It's time to let Germany and Japan pay for their defense. It's time to not get involved in every single war. Now, you know, you would think the finances would make them hesitant about going into Libya, but they're not even pausing. I mean, the plans are being laid.
If you want to police the world and pay for the defense of Japan and Germany, send foreign aid to the Soviet Union, you not only need the income tax, you need the Federal Reserve to print up the money when the deficit is accumulated. So we think the government should be much smaller.
What's your stance about closing or maintaining military bases around the world? Are there particular areas that you specifically already know that you'd like to close the bases that we have?
Yeah, all of them.
All of them?
Home. Yeah, why are we in Korea? We've been there since I've been in high school. Why are we in Japan? We've been there since World War II. Why are we in Germany subsidizing their welfare state by paying for their defense by staying in Germany? And why are we in 5 wars in the Middle East? We'd be much better off. We're less safe because of this. We're going broke, and it undermines our national security. So why stay any of those places? There's no economic or military advantage for us to be so involved trying to make other people live the way we do.
Some would say, Congressman, though, that there's a difference in being defensive or being offensive when it comes to protecting our country. Some believe that we can be more defensive, and when there's a threat, we can defend against it. Others believe that we should be offensive, which is part of the reason why there are some military bases overseas, so that we're leading in those areas. Why do you believe that that's not the way to go?
Because that's the way dictators work. To say it casually that we should consider being offensive, that's what dictators do. This whole idea that was encapsulated with the last administration that we endorse preventive war, or preemptive war, we go to war to prevent somebody from attacking us, that is endless war and for casual reasons without declaration. I think that is so dangerous. We should have a defense. We should defend our country. But when you talk about bases because we might need an offensive war, I consider that absolutely un-American.
Talking about foreign policy, let me ask you about Mexico. As you know, in the last 4 or 5 years, more than 40,000 people have died. President Felipe Calderón just denounced that most of those deaths could be attributed to arms being sold in the United States. Would you support any kind of restriction in the United States to prevent those arms, American arms, going to drug traffickers in Mexico?
Well, you know the scandal that's going on there. Some of that was deliberate, and and the FBI was involved. That is a real scandal, and I think that's is an outrage. But no, what goes into Mexico, Mexico has to deal with.
Yeah, but why don't you want to limit the sale of arms in the United States that end up in the hands of Mexican drug traffickers? What's wrong with that idea?
Well, if Mexico doesn't want them down there, what I want to do is restrict our government participation in that. But I don't want somebody coming restricting the right of an individual in this country to defend themselves and own a gun. Now, if it gets into Mexico, Mexico has a lot of responsibility there too for that. But when our government participates in it, then I'm with you on what you're implying, that we have to do something about it, and that's where most of the corruption is. But you can't deal with that problem if you don't want to even talk about the drug war. That's where the criminality is and the corruption is, and that's where the gang wars are. It's over the drugs that really we have to deal with.
Congressman, just one last question. Should we talk to dictators? Should we talk to Ahmadinejad, to Fidel Castro, to Hugo Chavez? Is that a good policy?
Well, why not? I mean, didn't we talk to Khrushchev and all the Soviet leaders? How could any regime be more ruthless than the Soviets and the Chinese? And we talked to them. So we should talk to people. Our problem is you take somebody like Castro in Cuba. We haven't traded with him. We should have been talking to him and trading with him and for a long time ago. The Cold War is over and done with. I mean, we don't have a very good record as Americans for picking the right dictators. We deal with dictators all the time, but only when they obey us. As long as they obey us, then we give them money and we prop them up. And as soon as they cross ways with us, then we start bombing and getting rid of those dictators. I don't like that.
Today I wanted to talk about Ron Paul's stance on Iran, which I completely agree with, and it's generally seen as something that's a bit controversial in the mainstream media and political establishment, but I think Ron Paul's non-aggressive, non-interventionist approach to Iran is exactly what our country needs right now. The media and the political establishment have been using the exact same rhetoric to justify launching a preemptive war on Iran that they did to justify invading Iraq back in 2003, and it blows my mind that people are actually falling for this. After 9/11, we all know the Bush administration stressed the imminent threat that Iraq allegedly posed to the United States because they might have weapons of mass destruction. In reality, there were no WMDs. The United States spends billions of dollars a year on intelligence gathering, but we weren't able to figure out whether a country had nuclear weapons or not. So that's something to think about. In my eyes, the government really doesn't have any credibility in providing the public with truthful reasons for going to war. Ron Paul is the only candidate who will not wage war on Iran if elected. I don't want to see more of our men and women go overseas to die in a war that we can't afford and that doesn't have a justifiable cause. The media and political establishment have created Iran to be a much bigger threat to the United States than it actually is. Iran as an enemy to the United States is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Think about this. The United States has almost 9,000 nuclear weapons. Iran has none. Yet we are the ones that need to launch a war. This doesn't make sense. The government and the media want us to believe that Iran is a threat so they can wage a war without much public opposition and expand the U.S. empire. If Iran is threatening to bomb Israel, which is what this argument often goes back to, that is Israel's problem. Israel has at least 300 nuclear weapons, and they're a sovereign nation and can deal with it on their own. If Iran and Israel want to get in a fight with each other, that doesn't mean that the United States has to get involved. Ron Paul said in an interview with Chris Wallace last weekend that we should offer friendship to Iran, and the neocons and warhawks have laughed at this remark, but I think it's a great idea, and it's so sad that we live in a society where we've been conditioned to believe that peace is not a possibility. If we stop trying to tell the rest of the world what to do, we might be looked on more favorably in the international community. Think of how the rest of the world views the United States. It's seriously embarrassing. We march into these countries, we occupy them for years, we try to tell them what to do and how they should live their lives, we take their civilians as collateral damage. This is why the rest of the world does not like us. On this Veterans Day, please take a moment to reflect on all the men and women who have been sent overseas to risk and sacrifice their lives because of our country's blind devotion to war. It's time for all of them to come home. A vote for Ron Paul means a vote for peace and a vote to keep our troops safe.
Congressman Paul, you say that President Obama is not too soft on Iran. You say that he is too tough on Iran. I want to put up some of your statements. Sanctions are not diplomacy, you say. They are a precursor to war and an embarrassment to a country that pays lip service to free trade. As for Iran's nuclear ambitions, you wrote this: one can understand why they might want to become nuclear capable, if only to defend themselves and to be treated more respectfully. Is that your policy towards Iran?
Well, even our own CIA gives me this information that they have no evidence that they're working on a weapon. Just think of what we went through in the Cold War. When I was in the Air Force, after I was drafted in the Air Force, all through the 60s, we were standing up against the Soviets. They had like 30,000 nuclear weapons with intercontinental missiles. Just think of the agitation and the worrying of a country that might get a nuclear weapon someday, and just think of how many nuclear weapons surround Iran. The Chinese are there, the Indians are there, the Pakistanis are there, the Israelis are there, the United States is there, all these countries. China has nuclear weapons. Why wouldn't it be natural that they might want a weapon? There'd be, internationally, they'd be given more respect. Why should we write people off? There was, you know, in the 50s, we at least talked to them. At least our leaders and Reagan talked to the Soviets. What's so terribly bad about this? And people, countries that you put sanctions on, you are more likely to fight them. I say a policy of peace is free trade, stay out of their internal business, don't get involved in these wars, and just bring our troops home.
Congressman Paul, I want to just give you 15 seconds. I want to just make sure I understand. So your policy towards Iran is if they want to develop a nuclear weapon, that's their right, no sanctions, no effort to stop them.
No, I think that makes it much worse. Why would that be so strange if the Soviets and the Chinese have nuclear weapons? We tolerated the Soviets. We didn't attack them, and they were a much greater danger. They were the greatest danger to us in our whole history. But you don't go to war against them. I mean, this whole idea of sanctions, all these pretend free traders, they're the ones who put on these trade sanctions. This is why we still don't have trade relationships with Cuba. It's about time we talk to Cuba and stop fighting these wars that are about 30 or 40 years old.
Mr. Kaine, Senator Santorum, I got a question for you.
Well, as the author of the Iran Freedom Support Act, which he is criticizing, because I authored it when I was in the United States Senate when it actually imposed sanctions on Iran because of their nuclear program. Iran is not Iceland, Ron. Iran is a country that has been at war with us since 1979. Iran is a country that has killed more American men and women in uniform in Iraq and Afghanistan than the Iraqis and the Afghanistan has had. The Iranians are the existential threat to the state of Israel. You ask the Israelis, what keeps them up at night? It's the Iranians funding of Hamas and Hezbollah and the support of Syria.
30 seconds.
And the reason, hold on, let me finish.
There are rules here, sir.
Yeah, I know there are rules, and you guys have been giving these guys a lot of time and not a whole lot of time to be, so let me answer the question.
You have a question coming.
Okay, the senator is wrong on his history. We've been at war in Iran for a lot longer than '79. We started it in 1953 when we sent in a coup, installed the Shah, and the reaction, the blowback came in 1979. It's been going on and on because we just plain don't mind our own business. That's our problem.
For most Americans, the story begins in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. A group of revolutionary university students took over the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days. To help burn this into the American narrative, the news show Nightline was created with a nightly tally of the number of days since the crisis started. But to really understand, we have to go back to 1953, which is where the story begins for most Iranians. This was the year that the U.S. overthrew Iran's democracy and installed the Shah, a pro-U.S. dictator. In 1951, Dr. Mohammad Mosaddegh was the first elected official who was appointed as Prime Minister of Iran by popular demand. He saw that the wealth needed to build Iran was leaving the country because over the past 50 years its vast oil reserves were under British control at the hands of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, later to become BP or British Petroleum. So Mossadegh became hugely popular for nationalizing the oil industry and taking back the oil. Hugely popular at home, but quite unpopular with the British government. Britain took Iran to the World Court over the matter and lost. They tried to hit Iran's economy by blockading the Gulf and halting trade. They tried to convince the U.S. to assist with regime change, but then President Truman was not interested. However, when U.S. President Eisenhower took office in 1953, Britain was able to persuade him under the Cold War pretext that Mossadegh relied on Iran's Communist Party for power. The newly formed CIA was sent to engineer a coup, codenamed Operation Ajax. Iran's monarch, the Shah, returned to power. He had previously been weakened by the new parliament, a short democratic experiment designed to limit his powers. After 1953, he returned fully backed by UK and US power, and the oil was soon flowing under control of Britain, America, the Netherlands, and France. The Shah became increasingly arrogant, opulent, and autocratic over his 25-year rule. He instilled fear in the population with a secret police known as Savak, created by the American CIA and Israeli Mossad, that tortured and imprisoned those who dared to dissent. He crushed all political opposition. Troops were sent to massacre demonstrators. He pushed a white revolution to modernize and westernize the country, giving women the right to vote and other reforms. But ultimately, he served the elites and created a huge economic gap for the poor masses. Powerful religious leaders saw that he was forcibly trying to rid Iran of Islam in a country that was 90% Muslim. One of the Shah's leading critics, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, was arrested and imprisoned for 18 months. After his release in 1964, Khomeini was sent into exile for 14 years. From abroad, he continued his anti-US, anti-Shah campaign through sermons on cassette tapes that made their way back into Iran and circulated as people copied and shared them. By the end of the 1970s, things had gotten so bad that major protests and the violence that followed were becoming a regular occurrence. The Shah declared martial law and banned demonstrations. This resulted in a huge protest and a general strike that shut down the economy. Soon over 2 million people flooded a public square in Tehran, demanding to remove the Shah and for Khomeini to return, and that is exactly what happened. One important thing to note is that the CIA orchestrated the 1953 coup out of the very same American embassy in Tehran that was later the site of the hostage crisis, right after the Shah was overthrown by popular revolution in 1979. The students were convinced that once again, the U.S. had plans to overthrow their revolution. In fact, U.S. President Carter did send a NATO general to instigate a military coup, but it failed. Iran and the U.S. had an extradition treaty in force that obligated the Carter administration to return the Shah to Iran as an indicted criminal. The students had 4 demands. Return the Shah to Iran for trial. He had been accepted into America for medical treatment. Return the Shah's wealth to the Iranian people. A promise from the U.S. not to interfere in Iran's affairs in the future. And an apology and admission of guilt by the U.S. for its past actions in Iran. The apology never came, but 20 years later, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright did acknowledge the U.S. role in Mossadegh's overthrow. So Khomeini took power in 1979 and instituted a government under Islamic law. Within a year of the revolution, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran without provocation, seeking control of Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan region and key oil shipping waterways. The resulting Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 was the longest and one of the most devastating conventional wars of the century. At least 500,000 Iranians were killed. This war further cemented resentment of the U.S. government as they were playing both sides. On one hand, they were supporting Iraq, providing money, technology, and intelligence, including satellite photography, to help Iraqi bombing raids. The U.S. helped provide Saddam Hussein with weapons by giving him agricultural credits and pressuring Gulf states to give him billions in loans so he could buy weapons from Western Europe, China, and Russia. The U.S. Department of Commerce issued licenses to export materials for Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program. The U.S. continued its support even after learning that Iraq was using chemical weapons against Iran, not to mention against its own citizens, to stop an uprising of Kurdish separatists. But the imperialist tradition also called for maintaining regional balance of power. So the U.S. also armed Iran, not letting any one regional power get secure enough to dominate or to ally with its neighbors to challenge U.S. hegemony.
Hey, watch out for them Iranians, even though it's coming out as another big lie, you know, from the Gulf of Tonkin, that never happened, that killed 60,000 of our troops, wounded over 300,000 for the Vietnam War, killed millions over there. Even though the big lies of they don't have weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, what this Iranian thing does, you see, Alex, for the people that don't know, they pick up the soundbite, and now they hate the Iranians. So now what they'll do, even if they lose on this one, it's another one under their arm, another piece in the book. So when another false flag comes and they throw another war on us, they'll add up enough to get a lot of the sheeple to follow. Remember,
well, that was my next point. They're already saying... No, you're right. They're already saying that, well, you don't buy this? We've got more fake Iranian stories about to come out.
Exactly. When all else loses, they take you to war. These are sociopaths and psychopaths. You could call them presidents or prime ministers. You could clean it up any way you want. You have to call a spade a spade. These people are sick. They're mass murderers. Can anybody say that line? They're mass murderers. They're killing innocent people for fake reasons.
The U.S. alone. Same question down the line, gentlemen. It's so important. Congressman Paul, do you believe the president needs authorization of Congress to attack strategic targets in Iran, nuclear facilities?
Absolutely. This idea of going and talking to attorneys totally baffles me. Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it? You're not allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. Now, as far as fleeting enemies go, yes, if there's an imminent attack on us, we've never had that happen in 220 years. The thought that the Iranians could pose an imminent attack on the United States is preposterous. There's no way. This is just this is just war propaganda. Continued war propaganda, preparing this nation to go to war and spread this war not only in Iraq but into Iran unconstitutionally. It is a road to disaster for us as a nation. It's a road to our financial disaster if we don't read the Constitution once in a while.
Around the horn, Congressman.
Arena known to all here in Durham as the WIC. This round of questions is going to be based on a scenario which we think is quite plausible, that any of you as president might well end up facing. It concerns Iran, and these are the circumstances. Its nuclear program has continued to advance. UN weapons inspectors have now saying that it appears that Iran is on the verge of being able to produce and may even be producing nuclear weapons. Iran has suspended its cooperation with the UN nuclear agency and asked the inspectors to leave the country. Cross-border incidents in Iraq involving elements of the Revolutionary Guards have continued to increase and are a continuing problem for U.S. forces there and for the Iraqis as well. The UN Security Council has imposed some economic sanctions on Iran, but has refused to authorize the use of force against that country. In addition, the threats by Iran's leader against Israel have become more pronounced and more extreme. What do you do? Congressman Paul.
For one thing I would remember very clearly is the president doesn't have the authority to go to war. He goes to the Congress.
So what do you do?
He goes to the Congress and finds out if there's any threat to our national security. And thinking back to the 1960s when I was in the Air Force for 5 years, and there was a Cold War going on, and the Soviets had 40,000, and we stood them down, and we didn't have to have a nuclear confrontation. I would say that we should go very cautiously. We should back off. We should be talking to Iran right now. We shouldn't be looking for the opportunity to attack them. They are, at the present time, according to the AEIA, cooperating, and by the end of the year, they're supposed to be willing to reveal all that they are doing. So instead of looking for this scenario where it is inevitable that we have to attack, I think we ought to be talking about how do you get along with some people that are deadly, like the Soviets and the Chinese and the many others. We don't have to resort to war every single time there's a confrontation. They are not a threat to Israel. Israel has 200 or 300 nuclear missiles, and they can take care of themselves. So you shouldn't assume that we have to jump in and go to war, and we certainly shouldn't do it without the consent of the Congress.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The war had been planned in Iraq many, many years before it happened. Matter of fact, the declaration of war, essential declaration, was the Iraqi Liberation Act in 1998. That was when the Congress voted on a bill that said we will have regime change. And unfortunately, very similar resolutions have been passed already in Iran. If anything, I would like to make sure that we don't needlessly go to war against Iran.
Amen. Rationality, not idealism. Rationality, not idealism.
If you were president, what would be your first step in our office?
Well, the very first thing I would do to sort of soften things what's going on there, within minutes, you could at least tell our aircraft carriers to start moving away from the shorelines of Iran, yelling and screaming and intimidating them. We have surrounded Iran now. We're getting ready to go to war against them, unfortunately. We're in a country to the east and a country to the west, and we're in the ocean intimidating them. And I think just move the ships back a little.
Would you bring the troops home?
Bring the troops home? Certainly.
Bring them home! Bring them home! Bring your troops home!
You know, it said that if we set a timetable for bringing the troops home, that they'll sit out and wait us. That's called a ceasefire. And I think the sooner they know that we are going to leave whenever it's reasonable, that there'll be a ceasefire, and they may even talk to each other. Maybe they'll come up with something. Just think how much peace there's been in Vietnam since we left. Million Vietnamese, 60,000 of our men died in Vietnam. So when we leave, what do? We invest in them and we trade, and they're more westernized than ever. The founders were absolutely right on this issue, that if you talk with people and friends with people and trade with people, we're much better off than trying to impose our will on them. This actually didn't start with this administration, nor the previous administration. This has been smoldering for about 100 years. It was Woodrow Wilson that said, we as great Americans will make the world safe for democracy. And look at what's happened since World War.
I want to switch to another angle of the war on terror, though if you want to weigh in on Iran, feel free. You say that we don't win the war on terror by closing Guantanamo and reading Miranda rights to terrorists. Congressman Paul says terrorism suspects have committed a crime and or should be given due process in civilian courts. Could you please tell Congressman Paul why he's wrong?
Well, because simply terrorists who commit acts against United States citizens, people who are from foreign countries who do that, do not have any right under our Constitution to Miranda rights. We've also seen that Guantanamo Bay has yielded significant information. In fact, we've learned that led to the capture and the killing of bin Laden. This is a tool that we need to have in order to be able to prosecute the new type of war, the new type of warfare, and the new type of terrorists that this country is dealing with. Regarding Iran is the central issue in the Middle East and their capacity to become a nuclear power. They are one of the 4 state sponsors of terror in the world. I sit on the House Select Committee on Intelligence. I can't reveal classified information, but I can say this. As President of the United States, I will do everything to make sure that Iran does not become a nuclear power.
30 seconds, Congressman Paul.
Well, I think she turns our rule of law on its head. She says that the terrorists don't deserve protection under our courts, but therefore a judgment has to be made. They're ruled a terrorist. Who rules them a terrorist? I thought our courts recognized that you had to be tried, and we've done this. And we've brought individuals back from Pakistan and other places. We've given them a trial in this country. Over 300, or at least near 300, we tried and put them in prison. So this idea that we have to turn on its head and reject the rule of law, we already are at the point where this administration, please let me finish. I have to say, and this administration already has accepted the principle that when you assume somebody is a terrorist, they can be targeted for assassination, even American citizens. That affects all of us eventually. You don't want to translate our rule of law into a rule of mob rule.
Senator Santorum. Senator Santorum, I want to pick up on this debate. You say Attorney General Holder must be under the influence, and in fact you've suggested perhaps smoking mushrooms, to want to try terrorists in civilian court. Are you also suggesting that Congressman Paul is under the influence?
Well, anyone that suggests that Iran is not a threat to this country or is not a threat to stability in the Middle East is obviously not seeing the world very clearly. He sees it exactly the way that Barack Obama sees it, that we have to go around and apologize for the fact that we've gone out and exerted our influence to create freedom around the world. I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for the Iranian people being free for a long time, and now they're under a malocracy that tramples the rights of women, tramples the rights of gays, tramples the rights of people all throughout their society, and is the greatest supporter of terrorism in the Middle East and around the world, and is setting up training camps and is working with Venezuela and other countries in south of our border to threaten us. Iran is a country that must be confronted. I was in front of this curb. I authored the Iran Freedom Support Act back in 2004. It was blocked by Joe Biden, nonetheless, and Barack Obama once. We got it passed, and I can tell you, if Rick Santorum and when Rick Santorum is president, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon, because the world as we know it will be no more.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
You've heard the war propaganda that is liable to lead us into the sixth war, and I worry about that position. Iran is a threat because they have some militants there, but believe me, they're all around the world, and they're all around the world, and they're not a whole lot different than others. Iran does not have an air force that can come here. They can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. And here we are, building this case out, please. They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they had nuclear weapons, and we had to go in. I'm sure you supported that war as well. Yeah. Okay. It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.
Job. Thank you. In light of the big needs and the financial realities we've just discussed up to this point, realistically, what do you believe you could accomplish in your first year as president? Thank you. That's a tall order for a year. Congressman Paul, what about you?
Well, there's a limit to what you can do in 1 year, and at home it's more difficult. You would have to work with the Congress, but a commander-in-chief could end the war. We could bring our troops home. That would be a major event. It would be very valuable. We could be we could become diplomatically credible once again around the world. Right now, today, we're not. Even our allies resent what we do. We would have no more preemptive war. We would threaten nobody. We would not threaten Iran. Now that it is proven once again, Iraq didn't have the nuclear weapon, had nothing to do with 9/11. The Iranians have no nuclear weapon, according to our CIA. There's no need for us to threaten the Iranians. We could immediately turn the Navy around and bring them home, and I think this would be a major step.
I completely support Ron Paul's position on Israel, and I think there's a lot of misinformation out there regarding Ron Paul's stance on this issue, so hopefully I can clear it up for some people who have been led to believe things that simply are not true. It is true that Ron Paul wants to cut foreign aid to Israel, and this is the evidence that people often point to when they wrongly accuse him of being an anti-Semite. This logic is completely faulty. It's not like Ron Paul is cherry-picking which countries should receive foreign aid from the United States based on whether they've been a friend or an ally to us historically. He wants to cut foreign aid across the board. In May 1948, the United Nations declared Israel a sovereign state, independent from the Palestine Mandate. 60 years later, you would think that Israel would be exercising its sovereignty and be making its own decisions. However, the United States seems to be dictating much of what Israel does and plays a very active role in settling Israeli disputes. I support Ron Paul's belief that Israel should be settling its own disputes. I had a hard time finding data on how much the U.S. actually gives to Israel each year, and I didn't want to say numbers unless I knew that they were absolutely accurate, but it is in the billions per year. I did find that in Obama's budget request to Congress for the 2011 fiscal year, he asked for $3 billion in military aid to Israel, which was up $225 million from the previous year. Ron Paul believes that Israel would actually be better off if they were less dependent on the United States. This has nothing to do with the fact that he's pro-Israel or anti-Israel or any of that other rhetoric that people seem to use when discussing this issue. Just because you're against funding something doesn't mean that you're against the thing itself. Let's apply this logic to something else. Ron Paul is against funding the Department of Education. This doesn't mean that he's against education. I often hear the argument that we should continue to funnel massive amounts of money into Israel because they are an ally and a friend, and in any type of international conflict, they would throw their support behind us. This logic seems a little backwards to me, though. Of course they would throw their support behind us because they're so financially dependent on us. They wouldn't really have a choice. They would be obligated to side with us because we have the power of the purse over them. This isn't exactly the most voluntary of alliances. There are a lot of strings. Also, I think it should be noted that the United States has trillions of dollars in debt, and although the Federal Reserve System allows us to print endless amounts of money to just give away to foreign countries, our irresponsible budgeting is not going to be sustainable for much longer, and our problems at home are going to go unaddressed. This is a very dangerous situation. Like Ron Paul, just because I'm against giving U.S. foreign aid to Israel does not make me an anti-Semite. I am not an anti-Semite, so please don't accuse me of being one. And thank you for watching, and please vote for Ron Paul in 2012.
Germany won the First World War by 1916 without a single shot being fired on German soil. British convoys were blown out of the Atlantic by German subs, the French army mutinied, and the Russian army was defecting. With British Prime Minister Lloyd George up against a wall, Lionel Rothschild and the Jewish Zionists offered the British a deal they couldn't refuse. "We'll bring the United States into the war as your ally and win the war for you," they said, "if you'll promise us Palestine." In April of 1917, President Wilson got the green light and declared war on Germany. Because of overwhelming opposition to the war, Wilson invoked the draft and passed the Espionage Act, forcing Americans to fight or be thrown in jail. Billions of U.S. taxpayers' money was delivered to the British war machine, money that was never repaid. In return, the British government wrote the famous Balfour Declaration and addressed it to none other than Lord Lionel Rothschild. The declaration promised Palestine and Israel to the Rothschild Zionists.
In 1917, Lord Allenby conquered the Holy Land, and the Jews were promised a national home in Palestine by the Earl of Balfour, a policy endorsed by Woodrow Wilson and by the League of Nations, which made Palestine a British mandate.
With the fall of Nazi Germany, the Rothschilds wasted no time waving their Balfour Declaration at the British government and reminding them of their written promise to give them Palestine. But how could the British promise the Arab land of Palestine to the Jews? In 1917, the British parachuted free opium and hashish to the Turkish troops and stole Palestine from them.
One ingenious strategy was to parachute hashish and opium to the Turkish troops to try to keep their mind off the fighting. Allenby's strategy worked brilliantly.
During World War II, the British needed Arab oil and signed an agreement with the Arabs which forbid Jewish immigration into Palestine. Then at the end of the war, the British broke their agreement with the Arabs and allowed the Rothschild Jewish Zionists to smuggle hundreds of thousands of Jews from around the world into Palestine. To win public support, the Rothschilds, who owned Reuters and the Associated Press, bombarded their media empire with images of homeless Jewish Holocaust refugees crowded together in ships off the coast of Palestine. On October 24, 1945, the bankster pirates gave birth to their most powerful weapon of global control, the United Nations. According to plan, the British pulled out of Palestine and gave the land to the Jewish Zionists. These Zionist extremists call themselves God's chosen race of people and believe they have a God-given right to the land of the Palestinians. It is important to know that the land now called Israel was originally called Canaan in ancient times. Canaan was populated by the Canaanite people, who were the ancestors of today's Palestinians imprisoned in refugee camps in Israel. About 3,500 years ago, the Semitic Hyksos kings ruled Egypt for 100 years, but were expelled from Egypt into Canaan. The Egyptians called these Hyksos people the Habarus, which means Hebrews. These expelled Hebrews invaded and conquered the land of Canaan and changed the name of the land from Canaan to Israel. In 135 AD, the name was once again changed to Palestine after the Romans conquered the land. In 1948, the bankster-controlled United Nations officially turned Palestine into the Zionist State of Israel. To deal with the millions of Palestinian residents, the Israeli Jews massacred and drove them from their villages and homeland. The Jews herded the Palestinians into two separated regions called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Rothschilds soon began financing Jewish Holocaust refugees to build illegal Jewish settlements on Palestinian land. These illegal Jewish settlements set the stage for Israel's Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's reign of terror against Palestinians who dared to defend what was left of their stolen homeland. Like Saddam Hussein, Sharon violated dozens of UN resolutions by using hundreds of tanks and American-supplied gunships and planes in an unrelenting campaign of bombing, murdering, bulldozing, starving, and terrorizing the Palestinians off of what remained of their land. In violation of international law, Israel also secretly developed over 100 nuclear weapons of mass destruction capable of vaporizing the entire Middle East. Defenseless against Israel's U.S.-backed military and media campaign, the Palestinian Muslims fought back with sticks and stones and suicide as their only means of defense against the wholesale theft of their ancient homeland. The story of the Bible was written by Hebrew Jews, who tell us that the Hebrew Jews are God's chosen race of people. Bible prophecy predicts that they will one day rule the world from their temple throne in Jerusalem, and that the world's King of Kings will be a descendant of King David and King Solomon of Israel. That is what Bible believers all over the world believe will come to pass. To turn this Bible prophecy into a reality would demand the cooperation of world leaders. It would also mean building a third temple in Jerusalem over the ancient ruins of King Solomon's temple. But there is one giant-sized problem. A sacred Muslim shrine called Dome of the Rock was already built on top of the ruins of Solomon's temple in the 7th century. It still stands majestically today in the heart of Jerusalem, and it would have to be destroyed. Since Israel is surrounded by not-so-friendly Muslim nations, and with millions of Muslim Palestinians living in Israel's West Bank and Gaza Strip, this Bible prophecy is impossible to fulfill. Or is it? Like a screenplay for a movie, the Bible story was written by Hebrew Jews. But who is the director and the producer? Is it God? Or is it a special interest group of the world's wealthiest men?
Israel, real quick, to get more evangelical votes. They want to see that they're not convinced that you're a, quote, friend of Israel because of cutting funding and all of that. Take me through the process here. Explain why a Ron Paul administration would be, if you will, a friend to Israel, or at least not antagonistic.
You know, the country that right now is considered our closest friend is a neighbor, and we give them nothing, but we trade with them and travel back and forth, and that's Canada. So, I mean, that might be an ideal set of circumstances. We don't undermine anything Canada does. We don't tell them what to do. It obviously is a different set of circumstances with Israel. But if Israel accepts funding from us, becomes dependent on, we make them a weaker nation economically because we encourage more of a welfare society. At the same time, we undermine their sovereignty because sometimes Israel would like to do things like deal with their neighbors differently than we want. They might even want to have a treaty with somebody. Oh, no, you can't talk to them. You got to do it our way. At the same time, they might feel like, well, you know, we have to deal with these bad guys on these borders, and then we'll say to them, don't do that. That might stir up more trouble. So they give up too much. And besides, you know, I'm against all foreign aid on principle. So it's not against foreign aid for Israel. But if you take a look at the foreign aid, we give 7 times as much foreign aid to their enemies. So actually Israel benefits if we stopped all foreign aid. And they're the wealthiest country in the region, and they have a better defense than anybody else and better determination. So I think they would do quite well without us there.
But if it's a threat to our national security, you take it to the Congress and the people, and if they said, you know, it's in America's best interest, you know, if it represented an invasion from the Soviets back in the old days, yeah, then they would say this is in American interest. But you just can't say one person has this authority or one generation doesn't have the authority to...
But it's one sovereign nation supporting another sovereign nation that also is based on a representative
But that would contradict everything that we have been instructed to under our Constitution.
If you believe that the Al-Qaeda tells the truth, and there's no reason, I mean, they're ruthless and evil and monstrous, but I don't think they're telling lies about when they explain why they want to come after us. And they do use the support for Israel over the Palestinians as one of the excuses. And you know, my position is rather simple. It's not anti-Israel. My position is neutrality. My position is to not get involved in these fights. And I think we would be better off as Americans. It certainly would be a lot cheaper for us. I mean, we're spending way too much money. We're going broke with this policy, and I think it just gets us into trouble.
I want to get right into it. The main issue, the crisis in the Middle East, the Gaza situation. You have said that even though Israel did the invading of Gaza, that the U.S. will eventually be blamed for it. Why is that?
Because of our association with Israel. I believe in friendship with all nations, trade with all nations, and diplomacy with anybody who's willing to talk to us. But we do a little bit more with Israel. We give Israel a lot of money, and with that money they can buy weapons from us. So we arm Israel, and we also subsidize Israel. So Israel can't do anything without our approval. Sometimes it's a tacit approval, and sometimes it's a wink and a nod. But even if we didn't approve of what they're doing, you know, at this precise time, we'll still be blamed. And in a way, rightfully so, because we're morally responsible for how we spend our money. And those individuals who are in fights with Israel would see us as subsidizing Israel. So I don't think about Gaza and the Middle East in terms of who's absolutely right and who's absolutely wrong, as much as I say, is it in our best interest? Should we be doing this? Should we use our money this way, especially now that we're in a financial crisis? My answer is it's not in our best interest. It is not necessary for us to stand behind everything that Israel does. So that's my argument about what's going on.
Because you have said that the U.S. is not going to benefit by involving itself in the fight over there. If this is so, then why do you think that so many U.S. officials, Congress, Senate, shows overwhelming support to involving the U.S. over there?
What's sort of been traditional has been going on for a long time. It's been going on for more than 50 years because there has been a pretty strong case made for the Jewish people being treated quite badly, and emotionally there was a argument for having a place where they can call their homeland, and people bought into this. But even then, there was no justification for us to be using our money for doing that. There's one thing being friends, getting along with people and trading with people, versus subsidizing them. So it's been going on a long time, and even from the origination of the State of Israel, the American people generally were supportive of this, and it's what they've read about and heard about, and the way they've been taught. Yet today there's a growing number of Americans who are questioning it. They don't have anything against Jewish people. They don't have anything against Israel per se, but there's a lot of them questioning whether or not it should be our money and our weapons and a blank check, so to speak. So if Israel would get into trouble, there's not very many people in this country that don't assume that we will come to their rescue.
And then if you bring Iran into the situation, many experts say that Iran has had a heavy hand in what's going on over there. You have said that the whole Middle East is just a powder keg. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, probably Iran is. I don't know for sure, but my position doesn't demand that I know absolutely. Because if the argument is that the Iranians shouldn't be involved in helping people that they care to help in Gaza, that would make the argument that America shouldn't be helping the people we think we should be helping. I mean, if it's foreigners that we don't like, we're foreigners over there being involved. But then when you think about the conflict and the arguments we've had with Iran, you'd have to go, back a ways. What about 1953? What about our CIA overthrowing an elected leader back then? Most Americans don't know about it and don't remember it and don't think it's important. They think that's a long time ago. But for the Iranian people, they're very much aware of what was going on, and they see us always interfering and telling how other people should live and what they should do, and our weapons and our money is always being used against either them directly or their friends. And even today, we have a lot of strong sanctions against the Iranians, and this is very.
My position is rather simple. It's not anti-Israel.
In many ways, we treat Israel as a stepchild. We do not give them the responsibility that they deserve. We undermine their national sovereignty. We don't let them design their own peace treaties with their neighbors. And then we turn around and say that when you want to do that or you want to defend your borders, they have to check it out with us.
When they want to take care of themselves, they have to ask us permission, so they've given up their sovereignty. When they want to have a peace treaty with Syria or another country around there or talk to the United Arab League, we inhibit them.
I think Israel would be a lot safer. I made the point earlier. We give 3 times as much money to the Arabs. Why do we arm their enemies? So if you care about Israel, you should be against all the weapons that go to the Arab nations. And I just don't see any purpose in not treating Israel in an adult fashion. I think they'd be a lot better off.
I would treat Israel like everybody else, but I believe the policy I advocate is in the best interest of Israel. Because Israel today has 300 nukes. Nobody's going to touch them. They can take care of themselves.
They one time in the 80s took care of a nuclear reactor in Iraq. I stood up and defended Israel for this. Nobody else did at that time. But we need to recognize they deserve their sovereignty just as we deserve our sovereignty. I believe if they assume more responsibility, there would be more peace there.
But if an incident occurs, the most important thing is how do you deal with it? How do you make the decision? Right. What you do is the president doesn't decide. He doesn't have the authority to draft you people and go off and send a war and say, no matter how much you love Israel. But you can go, you can send your money, you can do whatever you want. But if it's a threat to our national security, you take it to the Congress and the people, and if they said, it's in America's best interest, if it represented an invasion from the Soviets back in the old days, then they would say this is in American interest. But you just can't say one person has this authority or one generation doesn't have the authority to...
But it's one sovereign nation supporting another sovereign nation that also is based on a representative
But that would contradict everything that we have been instructed to under our Constitution.
If you believe that the Al-Qaeda tells the truth, and there's no reason, they're ruthless and evil and monstrous, but I don't think they're telling lies about when they explain why they want to come after us. And they do use the support for Israel over the Palestinians as one of the excuses. And You know, my position is rather simple. It's not anti-Israel. My position is neutrality. My position is to not get involved in these fights. And I think we would be better off as Americans. It certainly would be a lot cheaper for us. I mean, we're spending way too much money. We're going broke with this policy, and I think it just gets us into trouble.
Congressman Paul, you've expressed concern that Israel will act unilaterally and start war with Iran. You've also said you fear that the United States will condone an Israeli attack on Iran. How does President Paul plan to stop Israel from acting?
I think Israel has to do what they think is in their best interest, and they shouldn't have to come and ask us permission. If they have border problems or if they have trouble with Iran, they didn't ask us permission to bomb the nuclear site in Iraq in the early 1980s, and I think that was fine. But I think they become too dependent on us, not only for money, and they economically become dependent, they become dependent in that they can't even work toward peace with a country that we might not like them to do it. But I don't want any of this foreign aid, Pakistan or anybody else, because the principle is wrong, and because it doesn't achieve anything. If we stop all the foreign aid, you say, oh, you're going to hurt Israel. But you know, the Arab and the Muslim nations get twice as much money. Israel, and there are people in Israel. It's not like 100% of the people in Israel or every Jew in this country believes that we should have the foreign policy that we have. So I think Israel should be in charge of their sovereignty, and we should never intrude on what they do. And if they want to attack Iran, we shouldn't tell them what to do or what not to do.
But I think the motivation behind this is that when things don't go well, the opposition can go, you know, and blame the administration. But here it is, the contrivance with both parties all these years to plan for this and support it. And if they really wanted to end the war, they could. The Democrats finally win the election in 2006. And it was a mandate, and the Republican gets thrown out. What's the first act that Pelosi does? There was a supplemental bill that had a bill of ours in, and we had gotten it put in, and the bill said, you know, you shouldn't even need a bill like this. It said, you can't go to war with Iran without getting approval from Congress, you know, something. And she removed it. She removed it deliberately. And then, the astounding thing is they asked her why, and she said the leadership in Israel asked her to. I mean, that is how amazing it is that was in the newspaper, and that was in the Washington Post, that she was asked by AIPAC and others not to do that. And and yet, you know, we continue this process over and over again.
Hello, this is Ron Paul with your weekly update for September 26th. The Palestinian Authority's recent announcement that it would seek UN recognition as an independent state dominated the news and the political debate in the United States last week, though in truth it should mean very little to us. Only a political class harboring the illusion it can run the world obsesses over the aspirations of a tiny population on a tiny piece of land thousands of miles away. Remember, the UN initiated this persistent conflict by its 1947 partition plan. Unfortunately, the debate is dominated by those who either support the Israeli side in the conflict or those who support the Palestinian desire for statehood. We rarely seem to hear the view of those who support the U.S. side and U.S. interests. I'm on that side. I believe that we can no longer police the world. We can no longer bribe the Israelis and Palestinians to continue an endless peace process that goes nowhere. It is not in our interest to hector the Palestinians or the Israelis or to export democracy to the region, but reject it when people vote the wrong way. I have reservations for the Palestinian drive for UN recognition. Personally, I wish the United States would de-recognize the United Nations. As most readers already know, in every Congress I introduce legislation to end our membership in that organization. The UN is a threat to our sovereignty, and as we are the main source of its income, it is a threat to our economic well-being. Increasingly over the past several years, we see the United Nations providing political and legal cover for the military aspirations of interventionists rather than serving as an international forum to preserve peace. Neoconservatives in the U.S. have grown to love the United Nations as they co-opt the organization under the guise of endless reform. Under the sovereignty-destroying doctrine of responsibility to protect, adopted at the 2005 World Summit, the UN takes it upon itself to intervene in internal conflict of its member states whenever it believes that human rights are being violated. Thus, under responsibility to protect, the UN provides the green light for a kind of global no-knock raid on any sovereign country. I would personally counsel, if asked, the Palestinians to avoid the United Nations. UN membership and participating is no guarantee that sovereignty will be respected. We see what happens to UN members such as Iraq and Libya when those countries' leaders fall out of favor with U.S. administration. Under U.S. and allied pressure, a fig leaf resolution is adopted in the UN to facilitate devastating military intervention. When the UN gave NATO the green light to bomb Libya, there was no genocide taking place. It was a purely preventative war. The result? Thousands dead, a destroyed country, and extremely dubious new leaders. While I do not see UN membership as a particularly productive move for the Palestinian leadership, I do not believe the U.S. should use its position in the U.S. Security Council to block their membership. I believe in self-determination of people, and I recognize that people may wish to pursue statehood by different means. As we saw after the Cold War, numerous new states were born out of the ruins of the USSR as the various old Soviet republics decided that smaller states were preferable to an enormous and oppressive multinational conglomerates. The real pro-U.S. solution to the problems in the Middle East is for us to end all foreign aid, stop arming foreign countries, encourage peaceful diplomatic resolutions to conflicts, and disengage militarily. In other words, follow Jefferson's admonition: peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Thanks for calling this update. A new update is placed on this number, 888-322-1414, every Monday. The written text can be found on my website, www.house.gov/Paul, under the heading Texas Straight Talk. Thanks for
that there's another group of young people who support you overwhelmingly, and those are members of the United States military. In fact, there was recently an editorial called "You Want Him," and this was in a military newspaper, and the him was referring to you. And in this editorial, it reflected that you get a larger percentage of political contributions from active duty and retired military than the other Republican candidates combined. How can that be? Are they telling us something?
I think their lives are on the line, and they've been ripped off. They've been sent over. I was in the active military, then I was in the Guard.
Right.
But the Guard is supposed to guard us. Reserves are supposed to be there in case we were attacked. But now, the services are so worn down, they send some of these Guard units and Reserve units overseas. They're worn out. And just think of nobody talks about the cost in human life. 8,000 Americans have died in these wars that are illegal and, not declared. 40,000 severe injuries. And all I do is talk about, look, if we need to defend this country, we do. I tried my best when I was in the military. Right. But we just can't continue to do that. I think the military liked the idea of somebody being cautious. I certainly was looking for somebody cautious in 1965 when LBJ escalated the Vietnam War. Right. I wasn't all that happy about that. So I can identify with why active military people are sympathetic to what I'm saying.
Many say the surge is succeeding. We're at a turning point now. And we are creating a model of democracy in a part of the world that hasn't seen that. And that will change everything.
Well, that's the propaganda. I don't happen to believe that. And if you talk to the military people, a lot of them won't agree with it. I happen to get more money from the military, active military people than any other candidate because they see it more from my viewpoint.
I got twice as much as all the other candidates put together on the Republican side, and even more than Obama got, which tells me that those troops want to come home as well because they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Well, I was just going to say there was another thing he brought up at the debates when it came to veterans, and his first TV ad was about veterans speaking on behalf of Ron Paul, also who is a military veteran, one of two in the race right now for the presidency, as saying he's somebody that has protected benefits.
That's right, Chuck. So Ron Paul's been running on this military support recently. This came after him and Rick Santorum had that spar about Iran at a previous debate, and after that he's continued to pound home that he's gotten more donations from active duty military candidates than all other candidates combined, including President Obama. So he's hammering home his military creds, and now he's also pointing to entitlements as something that he will defend. And he says the reason he can defend the domestic entitlements is by bringing the troops home and saving trillions of dollars from overseas spending.
So, in some other Republican hijinks, we have some numbers out of RonPaulForums.com in today's story that you won't hear anywhere on the mainstream. The reports for fundraising for the Republican presidential candidates came out just a couple weeks ago, and our good friends at RonPaulForums.com have been crunching the numbers. Here we have total contributions by active duty military personnel by the candidate. Herman Cain, $6,223. Now remember, these numbers are coming from reports that may be, if anything, overstating these numbers at this point. But Mitt Romney, not even coming up to Cain there for active duty military contributions, $5,000. Michelle Bachmann, bit of a late start this round. Okay, $2,550. Newt Gingrich, whose campaign is imploding. I don't know if that was by accident there. $1,025. Pawlenty, all of $250 from active duty military. Rick Santorum, $250 also. Gary Johnson, sadly, none for his position. Total there of those other candidates, so to speak, $15,398. Sure sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Well, there's one other candidate who you might have noticed. Well, I don't know if you're watching the mainstream media. You might not have noticed that he was omitted from that list. Let's see, how much did Ron Paul get in this last quarter from active duty military? Oh my gosh, $36,739.79. No surprise, actually, that this was the case, far outstripping all other Republican presidential candidates put together, as was the case 4 years ago. But let's see, let's compare this to, who's the other guy running for president in 2012? Oh yeah, $28,833.99 for the president himself, including all the donations from the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, whatever that other branch is, to the Commander-in-Chief. Ron Paul is their choice. But let's take a look at the numbers from 2007 here just for a second, comparing Ron Paul, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, Mike Huckabee, and Fred Thompson. There's a little flashback. Total from the entire campaign back 4 years ago. Again, Ron Paul, until the end of the primary season, Ron Paul had more campaign contributions from active duty service members than all other primary candidates put together, including Barack Obama back then. So here's the latest chart. 2011 military donations. We've got Ron Paul, Mitt Romney, Cain, and Bachmann there. Nice to have a little visual effect to put that in perspective.
And these habits, whether they're eating habits or smoking habits or whatever, these problems can be solved with private property rights, with, like allowing restaurants to make their own rules, rather than coming in and closing people down and saying, oh, somebody lit a cigarette here the other day, you're closing us down, and, all of that. And I don't like, obviously, the cigarettes, and I don't like the drugs or anything. But I'll tell you what, as bad as I don't like those drugs, I really don't like the drug war. I think it's much more dangerous. A lot more people have died in the drug wars than they die from the drugs. Matter of fact, more people die from prescription drugs than they do from the illegal drugs. So they're not doing very much good by having the drugs legalized either. But we have a tremendous task ahead of us, and we don't have the same attitude that we had when they wanted to make alcohol illegal. You know, that's pretty good. They worked for 50, 60, 70 years to get the country to agree that alcohol was bad stuff. And I agree with them. Alcohol is bad. So they come along and they say, well, we're going to prohibit it because we're going to stop people from practicing these bad habits, and they have bad consequences. But what did they do? They amended the Constitution. Can you imagine anybody today suggesting we have to amend the Constitution to run the drug war? Drug war was started in the modern day drug war was started basically in the early 70s. And they have spent hundreds of billions of dollars on the drug war. We have more prisoners than anybody else in the world, and we have a lot of people who were put into these prisons. They were non-violent, and they come out very violent. So I say that it's time we allow people to make their own choices and suffer their own consequences. If they make bad choices, they can't come crawling to the government.
You struck a chord in the country, and particularly with the young people. Tell me what you did that struck that chord so well this time around.
I keep trying to figure it out,
yeah.
You know, and other people ask me because they want to do it.
Right.
I think it's basically ideas, and what I'm so pleased about it, the young people like it, but I preach a lot about self-reliance and, you know, taking care of oneself and being responsible. It also means that you have a right to your life and run your life as you choose, and you have personal liberties, the protection of civil liberties, and not try to have somebody micromanage people's personal lifestyles. I think that young people sort of like that. But I also blend that in with you have a right to make as much money as you want, and you ought to have a right to keep it or spend it the way you want, and they like that. But I think it's foreign policy. That's been a big issue for young people. I think they see the burden of the foreign policy falling on them in case these wars keep spreading, and they seem to be very persistent. The selective service is still there, and they know they're inheriting the financial burden. They understand that, but they also don't like the idea that they might be forced to go overseas. And they see a lot of their friends who've gone over and either loss of life or been injured and are sick. And I think they like my very, very precise position of a different kind of foreign policy, which sometimes they accuse me of it not being a Republican, but quite frankly, there have been Republicans in the past that have advocated the same foreign policy position.
Well, no, John McCain, if elected, would be the oldest person we've ever elected as president when he's inaugurated. You, back to our earlier point, and this is my quick exit question, back to our earlier point, you did something as an older American, as my grandmother would say, as one who's more chronologically gifted.
There you
in
go.
your chronological giftedness, you were able to strike a chord, a relationship with young Americans. What advice would you have for John McCain about how to do that if he can?
There's only one way you can do it.
Right.
And that is you have to have a different philosophy. It's the philosophy,
right.
You know, because we are of similar age. But the ideas of true liberty is a very young idea, and it appeals to young people. So in ideologically speaking, I have a very young idea, and that's a very appealing to young people. Young people are very idealistic, and they like that. They like consistency, and I've been impressed that they like the idea of self-reliance. A lot of people assume, oh no, they just want to be taken care of from cradle to grave. I don't believe that anymore.
Well, a lot of folks were impressed with your campaign. I'm honored to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Congressman.
Thank you very much.
All the best to you.
Suddenly, you are this hot candidate with kids. You're the most Googled. You're big on the internet. Do you know what that's about?
Not completely. I love it. I always thought freedom ideas were young ideas. You know, in history, freedom is a young idea. Tyranny is an old idea. Young people tend to be more principled, and they like that, and they know I've been dedicated to the principles of the Constitution, and they welcome the idea of somebody that talks about leaving them alone, letting them run their own life. But the other almost miraculous thing is happening. The young people are responding, and they come in, and when I ask them, why do you join the campaign, and I'll say, we love your position on the Constitution, we love your position on freedom. These are young people who understand. It's not like they don't understand what they're inheriting. They know something about Social Security, and they know something about intrusion of personal liberties and personal choices. That, to me, is a lot of fun.
They want to be left alone.
That is it, and that's what freedom is all about, trusting that individuals can make better choices than government can make for us.
This is where I'm encouraged, especially when I'm talking to young people. They're tired of it all. They understand it, and they want their freedom. They know they're not going to get taken care of by the government. I think that's the best thing that's happened, is the attitude of young people realize that they're not going to be taken care of. And they'd like, you know, they talked about opting out of Obamacare. I talk about opting out of the whole system. That's what the young people like.
What's up, man? It's your boy, Mr. Nick Bag TV, a.k.a. Blogaholic, man. Right now I want to just talk about, I know this is next year, but I want to say I'm personally endorsing Ron Paul for President of the United States for 2012. I really want people to start looking up this dude Ron Paul, because a lot of stuff he says makes perfect sense. It's like common sense. And I know a lot of black people are probably not going to feel that because, you know, Ron Paul white, he's an old white guy. That's probably what they're going to use against him. Probably why he won't win. That's probably why people are going to tell you not to vote for him, because there's no chance he's going to win. But I really believe that more people should start giving Ron Paul a second look, or even a first look, man, because this dude makes a lot of sense. And one of the things he opened my eyes up to is this whole Obamacare thing. You know, I'm not going to lie and say I was never for it, because before I looked on the scheme of things, you know, I listened to certain people and thought like, ooh, Obama trying to get everybody healthy. That's what's up. He trying to, you know, better everybody's life. You know, this, that. But then you got to think, got to use your brain and think, okay, free or not free, but a good deal on stuff. Even in the streets, a good deal is never a good deal. You know what I'm saying? Somebody come up to you with an HD TV for $50. That's a good deal. But you don't know who TV that was. It could be a drug dealer's TV they stole that's going to kill you if they see it. That could be anything. That's stolen property. It could be a tracking device in it that whoever bought this is going to go to jail because you buy stolen equipment. It could be just a setup, you know? But not to get too crazy with it, but the whole Obamacare thing, man. I was for it at first. But then I really looked into it, and I started looking up, you know, stuff. And I was hearing a lot of people, the Tea Party, they was talking about how the 10th Amendment, how Obamacare violates the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is that, you know, basically in a nutshell, the federal government can't impose laws on the state government and mandate it. You know what I'm saying? So basically, the federal government can't control just by themselves. They just can't tell everybody what to do. You know, they have to go through proper channels and all this type of stuff. They can't just mandate something for everybody. They have done it, but as far as this Obamacare goes, they saying that basically you have to get it. If you don't get it, you get fined. And if you don't get it, IRS is gonna look up your stuff, make sure you got it, and they're gonna go through all your paperwork. And that right there, as a black man, it's something I can't really get with that, man. Like, I don't want the government in my business for nothing. Not nothing, man. And if you start giving up pieces of your rights, giving up pieces of whatever you got, especially when you black and you just give it to them, just say, here, you giving me that? Well, you know, when you just do that, you already trapped. They control you, man. And, you know, us as black people, we always, you know, think we unfair. We get treated unfair. We don't get enough. So when the government says they're giving us something, we so quick to take it without reading the fine print. Then we get stuck in the end looking like, hold on, how that happened? Then we want to march. Then we want to talk about this, that, and the third. And this right now is the time for people to really step back. You know, stop listening to so much, you know, craziness and really look at the facts, man. Like, do you really want the government to get this one chance to see that they can sneak something in where they can basically impose on you to do a certain thing, and you think it's a good, you think it's free, or you think it's a gift, when realistically it's a gift to get more into your business, to see what you're doing. And as a black person, I can't go with that, man. That's like the Patriot Act and all of that stuff, man. I can't do it anymore, man. I done got hemmed up on it, and I feel like I got hemmed up on it because it's my own fault, because I left my guard down, you know? I don't want to see nobody else leave your guard down. Don't listen to what everybody says. Don't even listen to what I say. Do your research, man. But that's why I'm going back to Ron. That's why I'm going to get back to Ron Paul and why I support him. Because the dude makes perfect sense. He talked about, you know, America going to Libya. He broke that down. I was an idiot on that. I thought, you know, we going there for humanitarian reasons because Gaddafi is a dictator and he's messing with, you know. And then you listen to what Ron Paul said and you compare it to what Obama said, and it's like, yeah. You listen to what a lot of people are saying though. It's like, okay, we going to Libya, one of the richest oil rich country. We want to help them solve their problems, but we got problems in places like Sudan that's been going on in the world, but we don't care about their problems because we don't have nothing we need right now. But we get Gaddafi out, we put somebody else in, then he's listening to us, and then we good. And I don't know if this is true or not. They saying they paying Al Qaeda to beef with Gaddafi. Al Qaeda, the same Al Qaeda that supposedly took down our buildings. It's not adding up when you look at both sides, and that's why I want to. If I have to vote, and I encourage people to vote, man, I will vote for Ron Paul. Like real talk. Like I will vote for Ron Paul just because I feel like he's our best chance to helping everybody. Now I don't agree. Now I'm not gonna say I don't even agree. Now, I'm not gonna be like I don't agree with the Tea Party because I don't really know what the Tea Party really talks about. I don't know a lot of their philosophies and nothing. But with this whole Obamacare, they have valid points, man. And I'm willing to bite the bullet. Like for real, I'm willing to bite the bullet, pay higher taxes. I don't care. I don't want the government in my business. Point blank, period, man. And all you people know, a lot of you guys know, that if you get into a car accident and break your leg and you go to the hospital, you're not going to pay that bill. You know that. So you got the Obamacare. You go there. You know you're not going to pay your bill. So you're going to get, so they know you're not neither. So they basically say, okay, we know you're not going to pay. So instead of serving you the right way, we're going to half-ass it. And you're gonna be good because it's a low-cost health care. So you'll get less. You're gonna get less of a service for supposedly a deal. You know what I'm saying? It makes no sense. But that's where I'm at right now. I mean, that's who I'm endorsing. Ron Paul. Check out the website and start listening to a lot of the stuff he says when he's on TV. Because every time I didn't see this dude, he's been making perfect sense about the healthcare, about the wars, about the Federal Reserve. All of this stuff is just on point, man. And I didn't fact check the dude and everything. Everything he has said has been truth. And a lot of stuff Obama has said has been lies. Like Obama has lied to the black people, to people as a whole, just straight up to our face. I don't even want to say this, but I really fear for Obama, man, because I don't know if he's doing stuff he don't even know he's doing. He's a smarter guy than I am, but like Farrakhan said, after Obama is out of office, what is it left for him to do? Like, what is he going to do after he's out of office? All the peace, goodwill, and all the stuff he said when he was running that he rode on and campaigned on, all that goodwill is gone since he's been president. He's been probably more of a warmonger than Bush was, especially in his first 2 years. This dude then killed Bin Laden. He didn't kill dude. He didn't get no just cause. We didn't bring him in and read him his rights. We went to go kill him. And now we gonna try to prosecute Gaddafi over war crimes when we just committed one? We just went to somebody else's country without asking them to kill somebody? It's right in our face, people. Just start reading more. Peace out.
Because I'm telling you, they're slandering this guy's name and running it through the mud because they are truly afraid that he's going to unleash the potential of the American people, dog. And it would be a revolution, dog. And this revolution doesn't have to be fought with guns and blood flowing in the streets, you know what I mean? It's going to be a philosophical revolution. We have to change the way we're thinking. We got to change the conditioning that we're under, you know what I mean? This whole, everything is dualism, you know what I mean? Like you watch any type of mainstream news outlet. Everything is dualism. Left versus right. Republican versus Democrat. Christian versus Muslim. You know what I mean? And they're all straying away from the fact that we're all people. And the highest level of attainment throughout our history, throughout any civilized nation, has always been to reach for freedom and liberty. You know what I mean? And the fact is, Ron Paul got the best message hands down. And I'm gonna tell you, don't play into the games, man. You know what I mean? Because we fell for that Barack Obama shit. I voted for the dude. You know what I mean? And he was basically running off. I'm a scholar of the Constitution. I will follow the Constitution. And yo, this motherfucker's been trampling all over that shit since the day he got into office. You know what I mean? So I'm just advising y'all, man. You guys got to be smarter. You guys can't buy into the dualism tactics and shit. You got to look at what's right for you. You know what I mean? What's right for all of us. You know what I mean? The fact that we're a country who claims to be free. You know what I mean? But at the same time, they're telling us that we are already free and we're not a socialist country. They're implementing the fucking police state. You know what I mean? Just today I was watching the news where they were saying that a judge ruled that you have no right to reject a police officer from entering your house without a warrant. You have no right to your own privacy anymore. You know what I mean? So it's these kind of issues we need to really pay attention. We got to come together, man. You know what I mean? Because Ron Paul got an awesome message, dude, and it breaks my heart, dude. It breaks my heart to see black people falling into this shit. You know what I mean? You're getting bamboozled again, dude. You know what I mean? The one dude who got your back, who don't want to see your kids get locked up because they smoked a J, and you know what I mean? Like, it's just asinine. Don't buy into it, man. And I hope you guys do the research, dude. You know what I mean? This cat is hella good for America, dude. He enshrines American principles. So don't let nobody tell you any different, dog. You know what I mean? On pretty much every issue he brings to the table. Economic issues, foreign policy issues. We need to pay attention, man. You know what I mean? Turn off that fucking MTV, BET bullshit, man. It ain't serving you no good to watch it. You know what I mean? That's fucking entertainment, dog. You know what I mean? You need to get into education type of shit, on some real shit, man. Anyway, I'll holler at y'all, man. One.
To each of you candidates who are here tonight, starting with you, Governor Mike Huckabee, please tell me and this audience, in your own words, why you chose to be here tonight and what you say to those who chose not to be here tonight. Congressman Paul.
Well, the main reason I'm here is because I was invited, and I'm delighted that I was invited, and I'm very pleased because I go wherever I'm invited to talk about freedom. That, to me, is the most important thing, along with the emphasis on the Constitution. I believe so strongly that individuals have their rights and their life as a gift from God, and the purpose of government is to protect life and liberty. But I'd also like to extend that if you have the fruits of your labor, I would like you to keep the fruits of your labor as well. And under those conditions and under a freedom philosophy and under the Constitution, we would be so much more prosperous because we wouldn't be policing the world, we would be bringing our troops home, and we would take care of our people here at home. Freedom is something that we all believe in and understand and want to protect. Freedom was tested best in this country, better than any other country in the world. And yet, today, it's slipping away. It's an early experiment. Most of history has been run by tyrants. Most people in Washington are authoritarians. Either in one area, some area, they're authoritarians. And they want to tell other people what to do, and they don't think their job is but one thing, and that is the protection of liberty. That is what we should be doing.
And leaving people alone is not something I often hear politicians talk about.
That's sad, and I tell people the reasons I run for president not because of the things I want to do, but more because of the things I don't want to do. I don't want to run your life, and I don't want to run the economy, and I don't want to police the world.
They're all trying to reinvent themselves. None of them have any core beliefs. There's nothing you could depend on. This is like George W. Bush running in 2000 for a more modest foreign policy. There is nothing any of them believe in other than trying to get a monopoly on some kind of power in Washington. This brings us back to Ron Paul once again, who says, I'm not running for president because I want to tell you what to do with your life. I'm running for president because I want to back the government out of your life and out of your affairs.
Prostitution.
I think when you defend freedom, you defend freedom of choice, and you can't be picking and choosing how people use those freedoms. So if they do things that you don't like and you might find morally repugnant, I, as an individual, I don't make that judgment. So I don't believe government can legislate virtue. I can reject it personally and preach against it, whether it's drugs or prostitution, but my solution comes from my personal behavior with myself and how I raise my children. But whether it's personal behavior or economic behavior, I want people to have freedom of choice.
Adults, you seem to be saying, own their own bodies, and if a woman wants to rent hers out, that's her business. If she wants or he wants to smoke crack.
Yeah, I think it's tragic, and matter of fact, I think the war on drugs, which has caused the price of drugs to go up, and we treat them as criminals rather than sick people, we have pushed a lot of people into prostitution. So prostitution is related to the mistakes we've made in the drug war. But I think people make bad choices in religion and philosophy, but we don't regulate their thinking or their religious beliefs that they're not harming other people. That's why I defend this position that individuals should protect themselves. Governments can't protect individuals from themselves. It's just impossible. Otherwise, they become a tyrannical state.
Talk about freedom and tyranny. I seldom hear politicians use those words.
That's right. I think those are our only two choices, and we've had a grand experiment in this country where we emphasize freedom. If you read the Constitution was designed to protect individual liberty, to restrain the government. But we have forgotten that. Now we have an interpretation which means that we spy on the American people, encroach on their privacy, take care of them, run the nanny state, and then we have secrecy in government. So we have it now reversed. People say, well, they'll criticize me and say, oh, Ron, you want to go back to the dark ages, back to the dark ages of the strict interpretation of the Constitution. Well, I want to go back to the Constitution, but I don't consider it the dark ages. I think the dark ages were the days when all you had was tyranny. So freedom is new, tyranny is old, it's ancient.
With that, but let me ask you, as a citizen of Texas, if that came up for a vote, if you had a vote on the issue as a citizen supporting a candidate or whatever, do you think the state of Texas should legalize heroin and prostitution?
I think that under the right circumstances, we should legalize freedom, and that is part of it. As long as people don't force things on other people, I don't feel threatened by that. It's sort of like legalizing gambling. I don't gamble and I don't get involved, but I'm not going to take that right away from you. So all these things are things that you can do in a free society. But today I gave a long talk about this very issue, and I emphasized the fact that the reason I argue for freedom of choice is I want people to decide what medications they can take, and whether they want alternative medicine, whether they can drink raw milk, whether they can use marijuana when they're sick, and that we shouldn't depend on the government for that guidance. But if you do need guidance with children, if a law is there to try to protect children, that's a different story. But it's the concept of legalizing freedom, making choices by individuals and assuming responsibility for themselves. And even though that was a special statement about how many people would do it if it were legalized, most people aren't going to use heroin. More people use heroin because it's illegal. So making it illegal doesn't help that much. Kids can go out and get marijuana easier than they can get beer. So beer can be regulated in a way that they prevent the kids from getting it. Most of our history, our early history, there were no laws against this. It didn't happen
I guess I
until
have to get down to the question. Do you think you're saying, I'm not sure what you're saying, if a mother who has children to be responsible for, a husband, a father, should they be allowed to be heroin addicts? Because this is how far you're going with your libertarianism, it seems, even now.
Well, the whole thing is addictions are a disease. We don't put alcoholics in prison, so I'm just against the war on drugs the way it's happening. There's other ways you can handle it. But if you treat it like a crime and throw these kids, like we had for decades, in prison because they smoked a little bit of marijuana and they come out violent criminals, that war on drugs has failed. And believe me, the people know that. And so I'm against the federal war on drugs. I'm not pro-drug usage. As a matter of fact, I'm very critical of the carelessness of doctors
who give way too many pain pills. There's more people addicted to prescription drugs than they are to illegal drugs.
Okay, just to finish this conversation on this point, you have complete freedom to answer this question, yes or no. Should we legalize heroin?
I want to legalize freedom and let the states deal with the regulations.
Congressman Paul, you say that the federal government should stay out of people's personal habits. You say marijuana, cocaine, even heroin should be legal if states want to permit it. You feel the same about prostitution and gay marriage. Question, sir, why should social conservatives in South Carolina vote for you for president?
Well, they will if they understand my defense of liberty is the defense of their right to practice their religion and say their prayers where they want and practice their life. But if you do not protect liberty across the board, it's a First Amendment type issue. We don't have a First Amendment so that we can talk about the weather. We have the First Amendment so we can say very controversial things. So for people to say that, yes, we have our religious beliefs protected, but people who want to follow something else or a controversial religion, you can't do this. If you have the inconsistency, then you're really not defending liberty. But there are strict rules on freedom of choice of this sort, because you can't hurt other people, you can't defame other people, but yes, you have a right to do things that are very controversial. If not, you're going to end up with government that's going to tell us what we can eat and drink and whatever. You know, it's amazing that we want freedom to pick the future, you know, our future in a spiritual way, but not when it comes to our personal habits.
But Senator, are you suggesting that heroin and prostitution are an exercise of liberty?
Well, you know, I probably never used those words. You put those words someplace, but yes, in essence, if I leave it to the states, it's going to be up to the states. Up until this past century, you know, for over 100 years they were legal. What you're inferring is, you know what? If we legalized heroin tomorrow, everybody's going to use heroin. How many people here would use heroin if it was legal? I bet nobody would put the hand, oh yeah, I need the government to take care of me. I don't want to use heroin, so I need these laws.
I never thought heroin would get applause here in South Carolina.
More on that point. Let me ask you a final question here. In the book, you talk about the fact, as we've been discussing in this conversation, your notion of how the country can prosper by addressing the Fed as it's now structured. But you also make the point that this is also tied to our freedom. I hear the prosperity argument. What's the freedom argument?
Well, the freedom argument is this. If you have a secret central bank which has been given the license to counterfeit money, they're very, very powerful. So when governments grow, I believe governments grow, they always have to do it at the expense of the individual, whether it's economic liberty or personal liberty or fighting wars that we shouldn't fight. And there's always a cost to this. So if government grows and undermines personal liberty and pass more laws like the Patriot Act and all kinds of things, and you don't have to pay for it. If everybody had to pay for this through taxes, we wouldn't have this type of government. But we tax and then we borrow, and then we still don't have enough money, so we print the money, which then, of course, you accept the economic argument, but at the same time, the bigger the government is, the less personal freedoms that we have, and this is a pretty well-known fact. The maximum amount of freedom is when the government is smaller, and the purpose of government is to protect liberty, protect our civil liberties, to protect our economic liberties, and make sure that we don't get involved in these economic or the wars around the world. Because anytime you're at war, you're supposed to sacrifice for the greater cause, and people are more willing to give up on their civil liberties if we're at war. So it is a freedom issue for me.
Congressman Paul.
I've been in politics for 35 years. My cause has been the cause of liberty. And I am convinced that liberty does not come from our government, but it comes from our Creator. And our goal should be peace and prosperity. It is under the principles of liberty that you have the greatest chance of achieving peace and prosperity. That is why I am so down on these wars that is costing us trillions of dollars, why we have to reform the monetary system, why we need honest money, a gold standard and not paper money out of the Federal Reserve System. But also we need to change the environment for our businesses. We need to lower the regulations and the taxes and have private property rights and contract rights. Then we can achieve peace and real prosperity.
One person can't do it, but one person can lead the way. One person can't do it, but one person can lead the way.
There's 1 billion people on the planet. It only takes one to change it. Are you the one? There may be everybody in your classroom bugging out. Your whole school may be on fire with kids wild and bringing guns. But are you the one? Nature has a way of abundance. Nature puts out a lot of stuff looking for the one. So if you're going to go along with the trend of let's just kill each other, let's disrespect each other, then you're part of nature's plan as well, to be part of just the excess. But if you think more of yourself than just being the excess, you'll do more for yourself. Are you the one? Everybody's not gonna make it, but you have an opportunity to save yourself.
One person can't do it, but one person can lead the way. One person can't do it, but one person can lead the way.